Greetings to all viewers. Today is March 12th, and we are beginning our traditional Frontline situation review. But first, just a couple of words about the global agenda, the situation with oil and Iran. Things there are perfectly clear. The Strait of Hormuz remains blocked, there is no end in sight, and energy prices are creeping upward. After a brief pullback, oil prices have resumed their climb and have already reached the $102 per barrel mark. Just today, Iran's supreme leader made a statement that the strait will remain closed, and it seems to me that the status quo will not change anytime soon. On top of that, footage of burning tankers began flooding the internet en masse yesterday. But let us move directly to our battlefield map. Over the past 24 hours, we have only one update along the line of contact. Russian units have made a small advance from Hulyapol in the direction of Orikhiv. Yes, at first glance it may appear insignificant, but conceptually this is an extremely important moment for understanding the overall picture on the Dnipropetrovsk axis, especially since fresh insider information has come in from there. But let us take things in order. Think about it. If the armed forces of Ukraine were truly conducting the kind of powerful and crushing offensive that Ukrainian television is cheerfully reporting, it would inevitably threaten the advance of Russian forces toward Orikhiv, those very forces moving westward from Hulyapol. This would create not merely a risk of derailing the offensive, but a real danger of operational encirclement of a quite substantial Russian grouping. That is an obvious fact. Nevertheless, the armed forces of the Russian Federation continue to advance, stubbornly, successfully, methodically, and like clockwork. We are talking specifically about this Hulyapol, or to be more precise, Orikhiv, axis. From this, an absolutely logical conclusion follows. The Ukrainian offensive on this sector, which did take place and was even relatively successful, has now clearly stalled. My contact, who is directly on the front line, reports that they are successfully repelling enemy assaults. And of course, he is not alone in doing so. I am referring to the area of the settlement of Novonikolayivka. A Ukrainian armored group attempted to break through there and was ultimately completely destroyed. Simply put, south of Novonikolayivka, there is currently no Ukrainian armed forces presence whatsoever. I also want to say a few words separately about yesterday's footage from Novoyehorivka, in which Ukrainian armored vehicles were firing on residential buildings. Many people began claiming it was a fake, citing a frozen lake visible in the footage, arguing that the temperature outside is already plus 14 degrees Celsius and that this is old footage from February. Well, first of all, if the temperature has sharply risen to plus 14, that absolutely does not mean the ice on a body of water will instantly melt. That always takes time. And secondly, dear friends, if this video was indeed filmed in February, then it turns out that Ukrainian forces reached Novoyehorivka as far back as last month. The possibility of that was suspected at the time, but only I was sounding the alarm openly, saying that something was going on there that was at the very least troubling. I was specifically drawing maps back then and presenting data from the Ukrainian side, both official and unofficial. And indeed, when exactly 1 month ago, on February 10th and 11th, Syrsky's offensive began, it was followed by massive attacks from several directions, predominantly from two. On one sector, this breakthrough completely collapsed, was repelled and destroyed, while on this particular side, they managed to achieve certain results. And those results continue to make themselves felt to this day. However, if you read Ukrainian sources, they themselves acknowledge the obvious. Seizing control of, say, Verbov or Yehorivka does not yet mean a secure hold on those positions. Russian forces regularly push them back out. The settlements in the south of Dnipropetrovsk Oblast are constantly changing hands. Therefore, drawing any clear and definitive front line here is simply impossible. Essentially, the entire territory represents one enormous continuous gray zone. Moreover, and this is insider information again, fighting is now taking place even on the stretch between Oleksandrivka and the urban-type settlement of Pokrovska, not to be confused with the city of Pokrovsk in Donetsk Oblast. Russian forces are managing to destroy Ukrainian armored columns right on this short road, which is less than a kilometer long. In other words, there is no talk of any panic or chaotic retreat by Russian forces whatsoever. Ukrainian units, however, having broken through somewhere quite deep, judging by their maps, advances there sometimes reach 20 kilometers, with fighting already occurring further south on the territory of Zaporizhzhia Oblast, rather than Dnipropetrovsk, frequently find themselves encircled and surrendering. Although, to be fair, in such fluid engagements there are prisoners on both sides. Because of this, the Ukrainian armed forces are periodically forced to pull back. But the situation nonetheless remains tense. For the sake of interest, let us take a look at how the Americans are depicting the situation. Here, for example, is a map from the Institute for the Study of War, ISW. You know, when I first came across their resource, I thought, wow, that looks impressive. But in reality, they are absolute amateurs sitting there, drawing their information not from insider sources, but from the same official dispatches. Meaning they do the same thing I do. Russia claims something, they draw it, Ukraine reports something, they add it too. They layer it all up, color it in with multicolored stripes, and there you have it. Without going into details, they claim that the Ukrainian armed forces are already south of the administrative boundary between Donetsk and Dnipropetrovsk oblasts, and the fresh shading from the past 24 hours shows the offensive continuing. If you believe their artwork, rather large settlements on the Haicha River have come under threat. And if Ukrainian forces truly reach Uspenivskata, which apparently is located right here near Malinivka, things will turn out very badly for Russian forces. In that case, the advance of the Russian armed forces westward would be under direct threat of operational or even complete encirclement. But personally, I do not trust the American analysts on this matter, although the map itself, as you can see, does exist. Now let us look at the work of Petrenko, a Ukrainian blogger and cartographer who, with a perpetually frightened expression, meticulously reports which barn was taken and where. Relying on his data is impossible in most cases, especially after the SBU had a chat with him. And after such conversations, it is hard to trust people. So on his map, practically the entire Dnipropetrovsk Oblast is already shown as cleared of Russian forces. It is all quite simple. Yesterday, an official representative of the Ukrainian armed forces announced successes, and Comrade Petrenko was clearly shown exactly how his map should now look. It is worth noting, however, that even on his map, the situation is depicted less optimistically than on the Americans' version. That much is clear, moving on along the front line and looking at other sectors, but there are simply no other changes there. It was an extraordinarily quiet day for events. Perhaps it is worth mentioning only the Dobropilya direction. There, even Western sources confirm that the settlement of Hryshyn has almost entirely come under the control of the Russian Federation. The advance is evident, though it is not yet final. Some areas remain that are not yet under Russian control. However, the problems of the Ukrainian armed forces in this sector are no longer hidden by anyone, and that is an important marker. On the other hand, it is very disappointing that Russian forces have so far been unable to dislodge the enemy from Belitske. That is a small town in the Dobropilya district of Donetsk Oblast, though someone in the comments stubbornly insists on calling it an urban-type settlement. As for the Kostyantynivka direction, if yesterday there were reports of advances and counterattacks by the Ukrainian army, today there is absolutely no information coming from there at all. Let me say a couple of words about the Sloviansk direction. There has been no news from there for a day or even two, which means that by evening it will definitely arrive. Russian forces are advancing there with such calculated rhythm, enviable regularity and consistency that I have not the slightest doubt about this sector. Now let us return to the Middle East, where the standoff between Iran and the US-led coalition shows no sign of abating. If you believe the statements of the American president, Washington has already achieved an unconditional victory in this conflict, one so sweeping that some people do not even understand what to do with it. However, Iran's actual successes tell a different story. Tehran retains enough resources and targets to deliver painful strikes, which it is actively exploiting. For several days in a row, Iranian forces have been systematically destroying the energy infrastructure of the Middle East, thereby provoking a rapid rise in global oil prices. The key footage today came from the south of Oman, from the area of the city of Salalah. The video captures a precision strike by an Iranian kamikaze drone on an oil storage tank. The attack was a single strike, but as footage shot several hours later showed, the hit from just one drone triggered a fire that destroyed the energy facility almost to the ground. This vividly illustrates Tehran's tactics. They do not need to expend thousands of missiles. Precise and calculated hits are sufficient to annihilate the region's oil infrastructure. In addition to Oman, Iran also attacked the United Arab Emirates. The target was port infrastructure in the area of Fujairah. Published video recordings captured launches of ballistic missiles from one shore of the Strait of Hormuz toward the opposite one. According to eyewitnesses, the strikes landed on fuel storage facilities in the northeast of the UAE. It is obvious that Iran has set itself the goal of completely paralyzing hydrocarbon exports from the Persian Gulf states. Throughout the day, the Iranians also methodically attacked commercial ships attempting to break through the established blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. According to available information, not a single merchant vessel managed to pass. All blockade runners were either destroyed or sustained serious damage. There is visual evidence of this. Various media outlets are publishing footage of the destruction of several oil tankers in the territorial waters of Iraq, near the border with Kuwait. Videos filmed from neighboring vessels captured powerful explosions. Notably for these attacks, Iran has begun actively employing unmanned surface vessels, surface and underwater drones. As a result of hits from such drones, tankers are effectively wiped off the face of the water. Earlier, the US president claimed that the Western coalition had destroyed dozens or even hundreds of small Iranian vessels. Indeed, videos of American strikes on the Iranian fleet regularly appear online. However, there is an important nuance. The coalition is sinking ordinary motorboats with crews aboard, while Iran over the past year has seriously developed unmanned boat technologies. Today, Tehran released footage from endless underground tunnels in the mountains of the western part of the country. The footage shows that these underground bases are packed to capacity with unmanned surface vessels and naval mines. With this, Iran is signaling that it has sufficient military capacity for the long-term maintenance of a complete blockade of the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz. Naturally, the consequence of such a blockade is a surge in energy prices. Washington is doing everything it can to open the strait, striking Iranian positions in the mountains with ATACMS missiles. But Tehran's staying power remains substantial for now. Recall that immediately after the first news of the strait's closure, the price of Brent and WTI crude jumped to $120 per barrel. To knock the panic out of the markets, the US president was then forced to call Vladimir Putin, hinting to the markets of an imminent lifting of sanctions against Russia. This worked. Oil temporarily pulled back to $82. However, the markets quickly realized that Washington has no intention of lifting sanctions, given the colossal political and reputational risks. In the end, prices began creeping upward again. As an emergency measure, the United States, Japan, Germany, and a number of other countries decided to tap their strategic oil reserves. The Americans are promising to inject 172 million barrels into the market. But as experts at The Economist calculated, the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz has created a daily global deficit of 15 million barrels. The released reserves will cover only 3 million barrels per day, leaving a gap of 12 million. Russia could close it, but sanctions remain in force. Over the past 24 hours, oil has been trading in the range of $95 to $100, and the trend points to a possible spike to $150. For the Western economy, such a scenario threatens the most severe crisis. One might think that for Russia, under these conditions, a golden era is arriving, one in which its oil and gas will be purchased by any means necessary. But things are not that simple. Aware of the risks of forceful pressure from the West, the Russian Ministry of Defense has decided to reinforce the crews of Russian tankers and commercial vessels with former special forces operators, intelligence personnel, and Wagner Group fighters. Their task is to firmly suppress any attempts by Western maritime police or armed forces to seize control of a vessel. Recall that on March 1st, in the area of Belgium, local special forces boarded a Russian tanker from the so-called Shadow Fleet, and the crew complied with their orders. From now on, in such critical situations, military specialists will take command in order to prevent the capture of vessels. It must be understood that the West is more likely to resort to mirror measures than to lift sanctions. As long as the US and EU have oil reserves, there is a high probability that they will attempt to organize a total blockade of the Russian merchant fleet and the pipelines they can reach.